In the dark underworld of 1920s America, one name stood above all others: Al Capone. A man who rose from the gritty streets of Brooklyn to rule the criminal empire of Chicago with an iron fist. He was feared, admired, and hated. His story is not just about crime, but about ambition, power, and the ultimate price of fame. This is the rise and fall of the most notorious gangster in American history, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, the King of Chicago. Al Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrant parents. His father was a barber, his mother a seamstress. Like many immigrant families, the Capones struggled to make ends meet, but young Al showed early signs of rebellion. He dropped out of school at just 14 after punching a teacher, and from there, he began to drift into the world of petty crime. It was in the rough neighborhoods of Brooklyn that Capone fell in with local gangs. One of the most influential figures in his early life was gangster Johnny Torrio, who would later become his mentor and open the door to a life Capone could only have dreamed of. In 1919, Torrio called Capone to Chicago, where Prohibition had just begun. With alcohol now illegal, an underground empire of bootlegging, speakeasies, and corruption was waiting to be built. Torrio saw potential in Capone. He was smart, ruthless, and above all, loyal. Capone quickly climbed the ranks of Chicago's criminal world. When Torrio was seriously wounded in an assassination attempt, he retired and handed control of his empire to Capone. At just 26 years old, Al Capone became the boss of the Chicago outfit, a network of crime that would soon grow into a multi-million-dollar empire. Under Capone's rule, Chicago descended into chaos and vice. He controlled speakeasies, brothels, gambling houses, and a vast bootlegging network. Anyone who stood in his way was eliminated. His reach extended beyond the criminal world. He had judges, police, and politicians in his pocket. His empire was generating over $100 million a year, a fortune in those days. Despite his violent ways, Capone crafted a public image as a modern-day Robin Hood. He donated to charities, opened soup kitchens during the Great Depression, and even made public appearances to the applause of the people. To some, he was a hero. To others, a devil in a three-piece suit. But behind the charm was pure brutality. Chicago became the epicenter of gang wars. Capone's rivalry with George "Bugs" Moran, the leader of the North Side Gang, turned the streets into battlegrounds. The most infamous moment came on February 14, 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 members of Moran's gang were gunned down in cold blood by men disguised as police officers. Capone was in Florida at the time, giving him an alibi, but everyone knew who was behind it. The massacre shocked the nation. It showed that Capone's ambition knew no limits. It also marked the beginning of the end. Capone's reign couldn't last forever. The federal government, embarrassed by their inability to control him, began closing in. He had become too powerful, too untouchable. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI declared war on organized crime, and while they couldn't pin the murders or bootlegging directly on Capone, they found another way: tax evasion. In 1931, after years of building a case, the feds finally indicted Capone on 22 counts of tax evasion. He was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for tax-related crimes at that time. The mighty King of Chicago was finally going down. Capone first served time in Atlanta, but after reports that he was receiving special treatment, he was transferred to Alcatraz, the infamous island prison off the coast of San Francisco. Isolated from the outside world, Capone's empire crumbled. His health began to deteriorate rapidly. He had contracted syphilis years earlier, and it was now attacking his brain. By the time of his release in 1939, he was a broken man. Once feared across the nation, Capone now spent his days in isolation, battling dementia. He retired to his mansion in Florida, where he lived in fading luxury, far from the empire he once commanded. He died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48. The man who had once controlled a city had become a footnote, a cautionary tale of what happens when power and crime collide. Al Capone's story is one of contradictions. He was both a criminal mastermind and a public figure, a cold-blooded killer and a generous benefactor. He ruled an empire with blood and fear, but craved respect and legitimacy. His rise was fueled by ambition, but his fall came not through violence, but through something as mundane as unpaid taxes. Capone left a legacy that still haunts American history. He showed the world how corruption could thrive in the shadows, how crime could flourish under the guise of business, and how even the most powerful can fall when the system finally fights back. Today, he's remembered in books, films, and legends. But behind the legend was a man who dreamed big, played dirty, and paid the ultimate price. He came from nothing. He took everything. And in the end, he lost it all. Al Capone, the King of Chicago.